What's going on, Apush peeps? We have shout outs to the following classes: Mr. Cook's class at Myers Park High School. Mr. Singh, what's going on, Apush peeps?
So first would be the causes of the Depression. There is a general issue that just extends from World War One, with European nations being poor and America's economies being in a certain state. But the first specific cause is the lack of dependency in the American market. This means that we were increasingly dependent on a few industries, and whenever these industries would fall, so the entire economy would be affected. Next is the inadequate distribution of wealth, which speaks upon the idea of a consumer marketplace. As the rich of America continued to gain wealth, the working class was steadily losing money. The system is flawed because if the poor have no money, then the rich have nobody who can buy the products that they're trying to sell, which made them rich in the first place, leading to the downfall of many different stocks. Next would be the poor credit structure that involves a system where poor farmers would always ask small banks for loans, but they'd be unable to pay these loans back because of the poor market for crops, leading banks on a one-way track to bankruptcy. The next reason involves America placing high tariffs on their own goods when selling them in an already poor region after World War One. European nations often just tried to develop themselves as a result of this, and American products declined in influence. And the last and final reason for the Depression is the structure of international debt at the time. The two major issues were one, America encouraging European nations to take larger loans to pay back their previous debts, leading to larger debts, and the second is that Europe was unable to sell goods in the American markets due to high protective tariffs, leading to European nations being unable to decrease their debt because they can't get money by using America's markets. Great Depression can be seen in the stock market crash of 1929. America's economy and stocks were consistently increasing in what was known as the bull market. This was a continuation of the newfound prosperity that America saw as a result of World War I, and in addition to the very efficient and production capabilities that the war had required. In autumn of 1929, there were actually sharp declines in the American economy, which were foreshadows of the Depression. Big names like J.P. Morgan tried to resolve these issues, but this all failed on a day known as Black Tuesday, where all of the market had crashed and many companies became worthless stocks. Over 9,000 banks ended up going bankrupt as a result of this, and all the decline in bank deposits led to less purchasing power amongst depositors and thus deflation as there was less cash going around. The Federal Reserves raised interest rates in order to get more money back on bank loans, but this just made it more difficult for banks to retrieve cash and for people to pay back what they owe. Furthermore, unemployment was at its highest, with rates increasing to almost 80% in some areas. The ideas that individuals control their own futures persisted from the Progressive era, when Robert Burns would say they made it. However, now the idea developed in an opposing manner as many men became ashamed of their employment status. Lastly, the Depression also impacted family units, largely with divorce rates significantly declining due to how expensive they were. Family units retreated from previous consumerist ideals, with women trying to produce goods from home in order to save money. And lastly, many families were forced to migrate in order to find jobs, with events such as the Dust Bowl destroying entire regions that were previously used to farm. These families were also known as Okies. Many different oppressed groups were involved in the Depression, and although conditions did not significantly change, all groups were impacted in their own respective manners. Beginning with African Americans, they had those who had continued the practice of sharecropping or simply farming in the South became unemployed at high rates. They faced discrimination from groups such as the Black Shirts, who believed that jobs from that are held by black men should be given to whites, or simply white families should be prioritized. Next, the Scottsboro trials are indicative of public sentiment towards black people during this time period, when 9 black teenagers were falsely accused of sexually assaulting 2 white women and then sentenced to death in front of an all-white jury. This was later overturned by the Supreme Court and became a very controversial and publicized issue. This in turn led to unions such as the NAACP trying to include more African Americans within their scope and encouraging them to participate in labor movements. Moving on, Mexican Americans faced many of the hardships that African Americans did regarding employment, with many of their unskilled labor tasks becoming demanded by whites. This was whether or not they were performing services in factories. Their ill treatment eventually led to many migrating to Mexico or very poor areas of the United States. Moving on to Asian Americans. Their situation was also similar, with the whites opposing their jobs. They're forced to work at their parents' food stands, and however, In order to alleviate their situation, groups like the Japanese American Citizens League were formed in order to protect minorities from discrimination using the law as well as incorporating tactics to teach Americans ideas and assimilate them into the Western culture better. Last but not least is women in the Great Depression. They were publicly condemned from holding jobs, but employment for women actually increased during this time period. They still had to face things such as wage reductions and develop the identity of the economically and professionally independent woman. However, this was difficult as it was the exact opposite of what they were viewed as. An integral part of the Depression is the success ethic that it created and shattered during its career. Many people continue to believe in the ideas of the American dream and going from rags to riches. However, there was an increase in sentiment expressed against large corporations who were often blamed for the Great Depression. Furthermore, people believed that during this time of hardship, the government should be of more assistance and tried to find ways that the government could benefit them. Just as people were unaware of the extreme conditions of poverty in the early 20th century until people like Jacob Riis exposed the life of the other side, when Depression artists decided to expose social inequality during the 1930s, many Americans were surprised once again. Many studies surrounded the agricultural South specifically. This was also done through literature such as The Tobacco Road, which focused on poverty in the South, and Native Son, which was a book that focused on urban ghettos. Additionally, inventions such as the radio transformed the Depression. Many people forgot about their plights as they became lost in the world that the radio offered. Soap operas, comedies, and other programs captured the attention of all Americans alike. This new form of live broadcast was extremely important in establishing united national sentiment, with events such as the crash of the Hindenburg being mixed with extreme emotion coming from the broadcaster, impacting those listening in. In addition to radios, movies and news media journalism emerged significantly, changing the culture of the Depression. Walt Disney was a key figure in this as he created a popular film such as The Wizard of Oz and created the concept of animations. Journals were also very important as literature such as the Life magazine portraying information about the Depression, fascinating pictures, and openly challenged dominant American culture regarding any populations that were misrepresented by society, such as the average working class youth member. The last key section is the presidency of Herbert Hoover. Hoover approached the problem by employing a variety of businessmen and asking them not to lay off workers and voluntarily cooperate with him. This obviously reduced profits, so it ended up failing badly for both sides. The next solution that Hoover had tried was spending lots of government money on construction. This was not significant enough, and when in April of 1929 he tried another solution for the agricultural market by passing the Agricultural Marketing Act coupled with the Tariff Act of 1930, and failed both times in helping farmers maintain a steady source of income, his popularity began to consistently decline. Many poor ghettos were named Hoovervilles as if to say he caused the creation of them. After 4 years of the Depression, a group of unhappy farm owners gathered to establish the Farmers Holiday Association in establishing a strike blocking many markets. Another more prevalent protest occurred in the form of the Bonus Army, or a group of World War I veterans that were each promised $1,000 but were blatantly ignored when they addressed Congress and the government to return that money. In the end, Hoover just used police violence and power to drive them away, not keeping his promise. Prior to the election of 1932, the Democrats nominated the previous governor of New York, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and used his energy as well as radical economic reform ideas to bypass Hoover. After FDR's victory in the election, Hoover urged him to maintain standard economic practices such as no heavy borrowing, unbalancing of the budget, or tinkering with the currency, which were all politely declined by FDR. This shows the extent to which FDR was not only different from Hoover, but also willing to change in order to adapt to the Depression.
And good luck to you all. You are brilliant and you will do great on this exam, and everyone who is listening. So thank you for your support. It means so much.